family, we're trying to help the communities, and the idea is we can do all of them. And some of these other states have taken those steps. Maryland, as I mentioned, we have over 140,000 people. We've actually studied the problem quite extensively here in Maryland. We've changed the name of the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. We purchased $15 million offender case management system. But really, we've had no strategic, well-coordinated plan or thoughts actually in an innovative way, other than sort of giving the whole idea lip service. In fact, in 2009, the current governor put his lieutenant governor in charge of something called Skills to Compete, which is a workforce development action. One of the parts of that was to expand participation of inmates in apprenticeships and nationally recognized certification programs to make them job ready upon reentry, which is, of course, the laudable goal, which is what we're talking about here. The problem, of course, is the number of inmates who have been awarded certificates since then has actually gone down 23%. And so we have to change the way we look at this problem. So right now in Maryland, we're spending $1.3 billion a year on basically a revolving door when you have 50% of folks going back into jail, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So we need to look at some strategies in terms of reentry, not only because of the strain it puts on our wallets, that $1.3 billion, but because of the strain it puts, as I mentioned, on our families and our communities. So let me talk, if I can, and everybody here should have, did anyone not get the 10 proposals that we have, that we put forward? You know, we really want to talk about, we have ideas, because as I mentioned, this is an area that I've been very involved in as a prosecutor for 21 years, but very interested in your ideas, because you're all ideas people, and you're leaders, and this is what this is all about, ideas and leadership, as opposed to, you know, other ways of looking at things like, you know, posturing and not solving problems. So the 10 things we've talked about, and they're here, I don't want to really go into them too much other than to talk about sort of what they are in general, because you have them in front of you, but the idea of a Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Correctional Services who's specifically concerned with reentry and integration. And the second is to have these reentry intake centers within the facilities. The idea, I mean, sort of one of the overriding principles here is to have individual assessments of people coming out. Instead of saying, treating everybody the same, as if everybody has the same mental health components. By the way, if you're trying to figure out who he is, that's Donnie Glover, Be More News, and he must have been in the neighborhood, so here he is. And he likes to use that little machine. But to understand that every offender is different, they come from different places, they have different needs, and different skills, frankly, when they get out. And so the idea of having these centers. Establish reentry courts, and you'll see what that's all about, what it talks about. That's actually a little bit more of an extension of something that I've been very involved in. And I mentioned having worked with Eric Holder at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington. And he came up with a concept called community prosecution, which I then put in Montgomery County. The idea being, for example, here in this neighborhood, having your own prosecutor. So Casey would know who his prosecutor was in this neighborhood. So when there's certain things that he sees, or people who aren't supposed to be here, or gangs that develop on that corner, and that they know who the legitimate places are and who shouldn't or should be in that community, that's how prosecutors' offices are divided, by communities and by neighborhoods, as opposed by arbitrarily by crimes. You know, you've heard of community policing. If there's true community policing, that's how that's supposed to be done. Then you have community prosecutors, and ultimately we'll get to a day where we have community courts. And many of you have worked in the court system, so you see, you know, how many judges are in Baltimore City? Does anyone know that answer? There's a lot, okay? So a person will come in front of a judge, and they'll get a sentence for a crime, they'll hear the case, and then the next time they're there, or they may be there for a hearing, they're with a different judge. And there's no accountability, and there's no relationship built between the judge and the offender. So ultimately we'll have community courts as well. They do it in Brooklyn, they do it in some other places, and hopefully we'll have that. And that'll be sort of part of this reentry court idea. The fourth one is the cost-benefit analysis. Within that, the rubric, and Casey was talking about this earlier, is the idea of tax credits for employers who hire people just out of jail. What is it now, within a year?
It's within a year.
Within a year that you're released. You could do it within a year, you could do it within 6 months, and then is there a certain time you have to actually keep people employed for?
They have to stay employed for 1 year.
Right, and then you get the tax credit, and unfortunately a lot of people aren't using that, aren't availing themselves. It's a federal tax credit, but it's coupled with a state tax credit, and I think that's a sort of important part of the cost-benefit analysis. The fifth, you can see the redemption shield. The sixth is the mental health piece. That we have to no longer ignore the fact that a significant population in our prisons have mental health issues. And so that's what the sixth is to address. The seventh is about providing transitional housing to ex-offenders. The statistics are staggering. Regardless of your education, regardless of your ability to get a job, you have to have a place to live and to stay when you get out of jail. That's one of the things that significantly changes. Unfortunately, when you're in jail, you know where you're going every night. When you come out, you don't. And so there's something in New York, one of my close friends from college actually worked for them for a long time, called the Doe Fund. And to have a Doe Fund operation here in Maryland would be, or equivalent, would be important in this. And what they do is they provide housing and a job. Actually, they go around and do a lot of the trash pickup and that kind of thing in the city to give people an opportunity to get another job out of jail. The eighth is the protecting children of incarcerated people by families. There's actually a pamphlet here about families left behind, the hidden costs of incarceration. Look at this one. Everything. About the hidden costs of incarceration and reentry to families. The idea that children, it's one of the temptations when we were talking about doing this whole thing on reentry was to get involved in all the criminal justice system problems. And obviously, as you see, there's press people here that are going to want to talk about how does this relate to the Baltimore City Jail issue. We don't want to talk about that. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, but that's not what this is about at all. This is about the reentry piece. But you can't ignore these children whose single parent might be incarcerated and the effect that has on reentry because of the relationship between the family members and the person that's incarcerated. The ninth one I'm going to come back to. The 10th one is getting faith-based and NGOs, looking at some of the best practices. I mentioned what's going on in Michigan, what's going on in Oregon, what's going on in Virginia, and how we're woefully behind on reentry efforts because people really haven't focused on it or given it the proper amount of attention. The ninth one I came back to is about the technology. And so this is sort of very cutting edge where we are right now as a society. Many of you are aware of these ideas where, I always talk about, because a lot of people haven't been in jail or spent any time in jail, but they've seen Shawshank Redemption. And, I forget the librarian's name, but, he's pushing his little dolly down with his books on there and for people to read. And one of the problems, of course, with that is that's actually where people hide weapons and other things, paraphernalia in the books. There's an ability now to bring technology to get rid of the libraries and saving the expense of old school libraries in prisons and actually give people iPads, the equivalent of iPads. And every prisoner would have their own iPad. And remember, there's no expectation of privacy in prison. So every single correspondence would be read, and the technology's there. Despite what you read about what's going on in places like Baltimore City, the technology is there to stop any. I mean, in Montgomery County, for example, there's been a jail operating. There's never been one cell phone that's come into the jail. So I mean, this is not rocket science or science fiction. You can actually protect the jails, and because one of the big issues about giving everybody an iPad is, oh, well, you're going to be able to get all this information in and out that you otherwise wouldn't want to have happen. But that all the technologies there to block all of that information transfer. But the positive part of it, and there's many positive parts of it, is that you can get online training, online certification in different trades, or get an education while you're sitting in your own cell, as people do. There's all this University of Phoenix and all these online schooling opportunities now. You could do that while you're in prison, so that when you come out, you actually have a place to go. You can even secure a job while you're there down the road with the help of some of the other programs. So what I'd like to do at this point